General Gander Theron stopped directly before the prisoner and studied him with an air of detached amusement. His long, gaunt face was set in a smirk, his Crimson Empire insignia gleaming against his stark black uniform. "You're rather calm for someone in your position," he observed. "Most humans beg, or at least attempt some form of defiance. You sit there like a corpse waiting for burial." The human remained silent. His gaze did not waver. "Perhaps," Theron continued, circling him like a predator, "you believe your people will come for you? That they'll launch a daring rescue mission." He chuckled, shaking his head. "The Empire does not waste resources on the insignificant. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." Still, no response. A flicker of irritation crossed Theron's sharp features. He turned toward one of the guards. "Bring in Captain Yondo." The door hissed open, and a new figure strode inside. Captain Vex Yondo was different from Theron. Shorter, broader, his skin a pale shade of slate. His predatory yellow eyes locked onto the prisoner as he approached, his steps unhurried but confident. He carried a datapad under one arm, idly scrolling through it before stopping in front of the chair. "Jonathan Wickham," Yondo read, his voice smooth yet edged with condescension. "Former Special Forces operative, last recorded activity, mercenary work across the outer colonies. Multiple counts of unsanctioned assassinations. A remarkably destructive human. If these records are to be believed..." At last Wickham blinked, his gaze shifting slightly. Yondo smirked. "Ah, that got your attention." Theron folded his arms. "I'll make this simple, Wickham. The Empire has no interest in keeping you alive unless you provide something of value. Tell us who hired you. Give us the locations of human insurgent cells. Cooperate, and you may yet see the surface of a planet again." A long silence stretched between them. Then Wickham finally spoke, his voice low, unshaken. "Do you know what you've done?" Yondo arched a brow. "I'd say we captured a violent nuisance before he could cause more damage." Wickham's lips barely curled at the edge. "You think you have me. You don't. What you have is a storm locked in a box." Theron sighed, rolling his eyes. "Dramatic nonsense." "You arrested me," Wickham continued, his tone unhurried, controlled. "That means I let you." Yondo's smirk faltered. Theron scoffed. "You're shackled to that chair. I doubt you had much choice." Wickham tilted his head slightly, as though contemplating the idea. "You think it's the chair that binds me? The weapons? The guards? It's your arrogance. That's what's keeping me here. It's what always gets men like you killed." For the first time, unease flickered across Theron's face. He stepped forward, his fingers tightening into fists. "You don't seem to understand your position, human." The words barely left his mouth before Wickham struck. With a single, fluid motion, his body twisted, his thumb dislocated, allowing his hand to slip through the restraint. Before the guards could react, he snapped his wrist back into place, grabbing the nearest soldier by the throat and pulling him forward, using the alien's body as a shield just as the others fired. Plasma bolts struck the unfortunate guard, sending his lifeless body sprawling onto the floor. Wickham was already moving. He twisted the fallen soldier's rifle upward, firing a precise shot into the control panel that operated the chair's restraints. Sparks flew as the locks disengaged. The two remaining guards recovered quickly, raising their weapons, but Wickham was faster. He ducked low, sweeping one soldier's legs out from under him. The second managed to fire, but Wickham pivoted, the bolt grazing past his shoulder. He barely winced. Yondo took a step back, his expression shifting from smug confidence to wary disbelief. "Kill him," he barked. Theron, momentarily frozen in shock, reached for the weapon at his belt. But Wickham was already upon him. He caught the general's wrist, twisting it until a sharp crack echoed through the chamber. Theron's scream was cut short as Wickham drove an elbow into his temple, sending him crumpling to the floor. The last guard managed to raise his rifle, but Wickham seized the barrel, redirecting it before the shot fired. With a single ruthless motion, he yanked the weapon free and drove the butt into the soldier's face. The alien collapsed in a heap. A heavy silence followed. Yondo's fingers twitched toward his sidearm, but Wickham leveled the stolen rifle at him. "Try it," he murmured. Yondo hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. Wickham exhaled, scanning the room. His pulse had barely quickened. The chaos had lasted seconds, nothing more. He took a slow step forward, keeping the weapon trained on Yondo. "I told you," he said quietly. "You should have killed me when you had the chance." Yondo swallowed, his throat bobbing. "You won't make it out of this station. The entire Empire will hunt you." Wickham allowed himself a small, humorless smile. "Let them try." Then, without another word, he turned and disappeared through the chamber doors, leaving the wreckage of the Empire's arrogance in his wake. The corridor outside the interrogation chamber pulsed with red emergency lights, casting flickering shadows against the cold metal walls. The alarm had already begun to wail, reverberating through the station like a mechanical siren of inevitability. Wickham moved swiftly, his stolen rifle firm in his grip, his breathing steady. He had minutes, at best, before the station was locked down completely. He kept low, his movements precise, weaving through the narrow hallways as his mind mapped the most efficient route out. The Empire's standard design for military stations was predictable. The detention level connected to a security checkpoint, beyond which lay the central command hub and, more importantly, the hangar. If he could reach the hangar, he'd have a chance. A door slid open ahead. 2 guards, clad in sleek black armor, charged through, weapons raised. Wickham didn't hesitate. His first shot caught the nearest soldier in the throat, sending the body crumpling before the second could react. The remaining guard managed a hasty swing with the butt of his rifle, but Wickham sidestepped, grabbed the soldier's wrist, and wrenched it downward. The crack of bone was barely audible beneath the alarm. The guard dropped, unconscious before he hit the floor. He snatched a spare energy cell from the fallen rifle, slotting it into his own weapon before pressing forward. The security checkpoint loomed ahead, reinforced by blast doors and an automated turret mounted to the ceiling. Wickham slowed, eyes scanning the surroundings. Rushing in with suicide, he crouched, slipping into the shadows behind a stack of supply crates, waiting. The guards manning the checkpoint were already on edge, their voices sharp, tense. Full station lockdown in effect. Repeat, prisoner Wickham has escaped. Orders are shoot on sight. One of them barked into a comm. Another, younger soldier, shifted uncomfortably. How the hell did he get loose? He was supposed to be restrained. Doesn't matter. The senior officer snapped. The general wants him dead before he can reach. Wickham didn't give them time to finish. He fired 3 rapid shots, taking down the 2 nearest guards before rolling to the side as the automated turret whirred to life. Plasma bolts scorched the floor where he had stood moments before. He lunged forward, vaulting over the counter of the checkpoint as the remaining guards scrambled to draw weapons. A well-placed elbow to the temple sent one sprawling. The last made the mistake of hesitating. Wickham seized him by the collar and drove his knee into the soldier's ribs, then spun him around just as the turret fired, using the body as cover. The turret paused, scanning for a new target, its system hesitating as it tried to avoid friendly fire. That was all the opening Wickham needed. He dove forward, ripping a plasma grenade from the fallen guard's belt, priming it with a flick of his wrist. He tossed it at the base of the turret before rolling behind a bulkhead. The explosion sent a tremor through the floor. When the dust cleared, the turret was little more than a smoldering ruin. He exhaled slowly, adrenaline humming through his veins, then turned to the security console. He scanned the schematics. The hangar was 4 levels up. Elevators would be locked, which left the maintenance shafts. Wickham's fingers flew over the console, overriding basic security measures. A station-wide announcement blared overhead. Warning: structural breach detected in Level 5. Manual inspections required. It was a simple trick, redirecting attention elsewhere, buying himself time. He tore a vent panel free and slipped inside just as distant footsteps signaled incoming reinforcements. The air inside the shaft was thick with dust and coolant residue, but Wickham ignored the discomfort, moving with practiced efficiency. He had spent years operating behind enemy lines. The Empire prided itself on order and control, but men like him thrived in the chaos between those rigid systems. He climbed silently, his ears tuned to the vibrations of movement above. One level passed, then another. His muscles burned, but he welcomed the ache. Pain was a reminder he was still moving, still breathing. Reaching the 4th level, he kicked out another panel, emerging into a dimly lit hallway. The scent of fuel and engine grease confirmed he was near the hangar. He barely had time to orient himself before the air shifted. A presence. Wickham turned just as a fist lashed out, narrowly missing his jaw. He ducked, countering with a sharp blow to the ribs, but his attacker absorbed it, barely flinching. Commander Ral Varric. The Empire's enforcer stood before him, tall and broad, his black combat armor gleaming under the harsh lights. His reptilian features twisted into a smirk, and his deep-set eyes gleamed with something close to amusement. "I wondered if you'd make it this far," Varric mused, rolling his shoulders. Wickham said nothing. He knew this fight was inevitable. Varric struck first, a powerful kick aimed at Wickham's midsection. He dodged, barely, but the force of the blow sent him skidding back. Varric followed through with a brutal series of attacks. Fists like hammers, each strike designed to overwhelm. Wickham shifted his weight, absorbing the momentum. He fought smart, precise, weaving through the onslaught, waiting for an opening. Then he found it. Varric overextended, just slightly. Wickham capitalized, stepping in, driving an elbow into the commander's solar plexus before twisting and slamming a knee into his jaw. Varric staggered but recovered quickly. He grinned, blood trailing from his split lip. "Not bad," he admitted, "but it won't be enough." Wickham didn't waste time with words. He lunged, locking Varric into a chokehold, using every ounce of leverage to cut off airflow. The commander thrashed, but Wickham held firm, his grip unyielding. Seconds stretched. Then Varric's struggle slowed. With a final, sharp twist, Wickham rendered him unconscious, letting the body slump to the floor. He didn't linger. The fight had cost him time. Bursting through the hangar doors, he was met with a chaotic flurry of movement. Fighters lined the docking platforms, fueling crews scattering as alarms continued to blare. The Empire had scrambled a response team. Half a dozen troopers were already securing vessels. Wickham scanned the options. A sleek interceptor, its cockpit open, sat on the nearest pad. He sprinted. The first soldier turned, raising a rifle. Wickham fired mid-stride, dropping him. The others reacted, weapons trained, but Wickham was already moving, twisting his body midair as he vaulted over a crate, firing 2 precise shots. Another fell. He hit the ramp at full speed, diving into the cockpit. His hands flew over the unfamiliar controls, bypassing safety protocols, overriding launch restrictions. Engines roared to life. Outside, reinforcements poured into the hangar. Officers shouted orders. A cruiser overhead rotated its cannons, locking onto his position. Wickham gritted his teeth, fingers tightening around the throttle. The ship lurched as plasma fire grazed the hull. Then it shot forward, hurtling out of the hangar bay and into the endless expanse of space. Alarms continued blaring inside the cockpit, proximity warnings flashing red. Empire patrols were already in pursuit. Wickham exhaled, steadying his breath. He adjusted course, angling toward open space, away from the station's firing range. For the first time since his capture, he allowed himself the smallest flicker of satisfaction. They had underestimated him, and now they would regret it. The interceptor cut through the vast emptiness of space, its engines burning hot against a cold void. Inside the cockpit, Wickham worked with ruthless efficiency, overriding security measures, rerouting power to the thrusters, and scanning for potential allies. The ship's navigation display flickered erratically, searching for a nearby system outside the Empire's immediate reach. Pursuit was inevitable. The Empire didn't tolerate defiance, and Wickham had humiliated them. He had left bodies in their corridors, shattered their sense of control. Now, they would be coming in force. The comm system crackled to life. A voice, sharp and commanding, filtered through the static. Unidentified vessel, you are entering restricted airspace. Transmit clearance codes or prepare to be engaged. Wickham's fingers hovered over the controls. It was a calculated risk. The signal was coming from an orbital station orbiting a barren moon, an old, repurposed military outpost, judging by the energy signatures. The Empire rarely maintained active presence in such backwater locations, which meant one of two things: a black site or something off the record. He keyed in a response, voice calm. "This is Wickham. If you want to live, let me land." A long silence stretched between transmissions. Then a different voice came through, older, heavier with suspicion. "Say that name again." "Jonathan Wickham." A pause. Then the station's automated defenses powered down. The targeting lock disengaged. "Docking Bay 4. The voice relented. "You've got 3 minutes." The station loomed ahead, a steel husk against the moon's pale glow. As Wickham maneuvered into the landing bay, he kept his weapon close. He had allies once, but wore scattered men like debris in a storm. The past had a way of turning trusted comrades into ghosts. The docking ramp hissed open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Figures emerged from the shadows, weapons at the ready. Wickham recognized the leader instantly. Garrick Harlow, former Special Forces operative, now the closest thing to a warlord in the outer systems. His hair was streaked with silver, his face lined with years of conflict, but his stance remained sharp, his grip on his rifle firm. "You're supposed to be dead," Harlow said, voice edged with both disbelief and irritation. Wickham smirked faintly. "They tried." Harlow studied him for a moment, before gesturing for the others to lower their weapons. "Get inside before you bring half the damn Empire down on us." The interior of the station was a patchwork of old and new, salvage Imperial tech mixed with outdated human engineering, a clear sign of limited resources. Wickham followed Harlow through narrow corridors, past groups of weary fighters checking their gear. They weren't soldiers, not anymore. Rebels, mercenaries, survivors. Inside a reinforced command chamber, Harlow leaned against a console, arms crossed. You breaking out of an Imperial black site and stealing one of their fighters isn't exactly subtle. What's your endgame, Wickham? The Empire's moving to wipe out human insurgents. Not just target them, exterminate. Wickham's voice remained level, but his words carried weight. They've been keeping records, strategizing large-scale purges. I saw enough to know it's happening soon. Harlow's expression darkened. You sure about that? They don't waste time on half measures. If we don't act now, there won't be anything left to fight for. One of the younger rebels, Dane Fletcher, shifted uncomfortably. He was sharp-eyed, lean, his uniform too clean to have seen the kind of battles Harlow had survived. "We've hit Empire supply routes, sabotage comms. If they were planning something this big, we'd have heard about it." Wickham turned his gaze on him, unreadable. "You don't hear the knife before it's in your back." Harlow let out a slow breath, rubbing his jaw. "If they're planning a full-scale purge, we need proof. Something concrete." "I have coordinates," Wickham said. "An Imperial command ship. If we infiltrate their systems, we'll get the evidence we need." Fletcher scoffed. "And how exactly do you plan to get aboard an Imperial warship? Knock on the airlock." Wickham didn't blink. "We get captured." A silence fell over the room. Harlow frowned. "You're serious." "They expect me to run," Wickham said. "They expect me to hide. They won't be looking for an attack from inside their own ship." Harlow exhaled, considering. Finally, he nodded. "It's insane, but if it works..." Fletcher muttered something under his breath, but didn't argue. Preparations were swift. The plan was simple in theory. Harlow's team would use a stolen Imperial shuttle to stage a false capture. Once inside, Wickham would secure access to their mainframe, while the others provided cover. The journey to the warship's last known location was tense. Inside the shuttle, Wickham sat with his wrists loosely bound, the illusion of captivity barely disguising the simmering violence beneath his calm exterior. Harlow piloted, broadcasting Imperial code stolen from a previous raid. The moment the warship came into view, an automated hail followed. Unidentified vessel. State your purpose. Harlow responded with perfect military precision. Prisoner transfer, Jonathan Wickham. High priority asset. Another pause. Then, acknowledged. Proceed to docking bay 2. The transition was seamless. The shuttle landed. Docking clamps locking into place with a mechanical hiss. As the ramp lowered, a squad of Imperial soldiers met them, weapons at the ready. A tall officer, sharp-featured and expressionless, stepped forward. Captain Vex Yondo. His gaze flickered with recognition the moment he saw Wickham. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Yondo murmured, voice even. "Life's full of disappointments," Wickham replied. Yondo signaled to his men. "Secure him. The rest of you, wait here." Harlow gave a barely perceptible nod. Wickham remained passive as restraints were placed on his wrists, but the second they tightened, he felt the countdown begin. He was inside. Yondo led the way through the ship's pristine corridors, the hum of Imperial efficiency evident in every step. Soldiers moved with rigid precision. Officers issued orders in clipped tones, and security nodes tracked every movement. Wickham remained silent, absorbing every detail. Yondo finally stopped outside a reinforced chamber. He pressed a hand against the security panel, scanning in his credentials. The door slid open, revealing a small but heavily fortified command center. Inside, rows of monitors displayed fleet positions, encrypted transmissions, and classified directives. And at the center, proof. Wickham's gaze locked onto the data feeds, detailing the upcoming human extermination efforts. The timeline was shorter than expected. Mere days. Yondo turned to face him, arms crossed. "You're not as unpredictable as you think." Wickham smirked. "Neither are you." In a blur, he moved. A well-placed kick sent Yondo stumbling. The guard behind him barely had time to react before Wickham drove an elbow into his throat, seizing the man's weapon in the same motion. A single shot. The second guard collapsed. Yondo recovered quickly, drawing his own weapon, but Wickham was faster. He fired, forcing Yondo to dive for cover. An alarm blared through the ship. Wickham didn't hesitate. He moved to the console, fingers flying over controls, transmitting every piece of intel to Harlow's team. Warnings flashed across the screen. Security forces were converging. He turned, rifle ready, just as Yondo lunged. The impact sent them both crashing against the console, sparks flying as Yondo's blade sliced past Wickham's shoulder, drawing blood. Wickham gritted his teeth, twisting free, driving a knee into Yondo's ribs. The captain staggered but remained upright. The fight was brutal. Yondo was skilled, relentless, his attacks calculated. But Wickham was a force of nature. A final strike, quick, precise, left Yondo gasping on the floor, his own weapon trained on him. "Should have killed me when you had the chance," Wickham murmured. With one last glance at the console, he turned and ran. The ship trembled. Explosions echoed through the halls. Harlow's team had triggered their secondary plan. Wickham sprinted toward the docking bay, enemy fire nipping at his heels. The stolen shuttle was already lifting off, Harlow at the controls. Wickham leaped onto the ramp just as the ship lurched forward, escaping into the void. As the warship shrank in the distance, Wickham exhaled. They had what they needed, and the Empire would never see what was coming next. The stars burned cold in the abyss of space, distant and indifferent to the war about to unfold. Inside the rebel war room, Wickham stood at the center of a gathered force, a mix of hardened survivors, rogue operatives, and the last remnants of humanity's defiance. The stolen Imperial data glowed on the main display, revealing the full horror of the Empire's plan. The purge wasn't coming. It had already begun. Harlow's voice was low, grim. They're moving faster than expected. Entire colonies wiped out, orbital bombardments, reducing human settlements to dust. This isn't just suppression. This is extinction. Fletcher, his usual skepticism stripped away, leaned over the console, his jaw tight. And if we don't stop them now, there won't be a resistance left to fight. Wickham's gaze remained fixed on the map. The Empire had made a fatal error. They believed power alone was enough to ensure obedience. They had underestimated the sheer will of those they sought to erase. His voice was measured when he spoke. We hit them where it hurts. Harlow turned to him, frowning. Their fleet's already mobilized. We can't take them in open war. We won't, Wickham said. We don't need to defeat their army. We need to cut off its head. The warship they had infiltrated was part of the Emperor's elite fleet, and the information Wickham had extracted revealed the location of the true target. The Empire's Supreme Command ship, the Eternus Dominion. On board, General Gander Theron personally orchestrated the purge, issuing commands from the heart of the Empire's war machine. He was the architect of annihilation, and if he fell, their forces would fragment. The plan was desperate. A small infiltration team, led by Wickham himself, would board the Eternus Dominion, bypass security, and assassinate Theron before he could issue further orders. Meanwhile, Harlow's fleet would launch a diversionary assault, drawing attention away from the strike team. As they prepared, Wickham sat in the armory, methodically loading his weapons. His movements were precise, practiced, yet there was something deeper behind them. This was more than a mission. This was reckoning. Fletcher leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. You ever hesitate? Wickham didn't look up. Hesitation gets people killed. Fletcher exhaled, watching him for a long moment. You're not fighting just to stop them, are you? This is personal. Wickham finally met his gaze. It's personal for all of us. When the attack began, the vast Imperial fleet moved in formation, sleek warships blotting out the stars. The rebel force surged forward, outgunned but determined, their fighters darting between the larger vessels, striking fast and hard. It was chaos, fire and light dancing against the void. Inside a disguised Imperial transport, Wickham and his team drifted closer to the Eternus Dominion, using the confusion of battle to slip past external defenses. The warship was a fortress, impenetrable from the outside, but from within, it could be unraveled. They breached the docking bay with surgical precision, slipping through the corridors like ghosts. Wickham moved ahead, every step calculated, every breath steady. The ship's hulls were pristine, sterile, an arrogance of design, a belief in invulnerability. That arrogance shattered the moment they struck. They moved fast, eliminating sentries, overriding security locks, carving a direct path toward the command center. Wickham led the charge, his blade flashing as he cut down an officer before he could raise the alarm. They couldn't afford drawn-out fights. Every second counted. The deeper they pushed, the heavier the resistance became. Imperial troopers flooded the halls, blaster fire tearing through the steel walls. Wickham weaved through the onslaught, his movements fluid, lethal. A shot grazed his arm, but he didn't slow, pressing forward with relentless purpose. Explosions rocked the ship as Harlow's fleet intensified their assault, forcing the Empire to divert forces away from internal security. It was a calculated gamble, and it was working. They reached the final corridor. The doors to the command bridge loomed ahead, reinforced, nearly impenetrable. Nearly. Wickham turned to Fletcher. Set the charges. Fletcher moved swiftly, planting explosives along the frame. Behind him, the sounds of approaching reinforcements grew louder. Time was slipping away. The charges blew, sending a shockwave through the hall. The doors crumpled inward, exposing the bridge. Inside, General Gander Theron stood waiting. His expression was unreadable, his posture unmoving. He was not a man who had ever feared battle. He had built an empire on the bodies of those who opposed him. His guards rushed forward, but Wickham moved faster. A storm of violence erupted in the confined space. Wickham tore through the opposition, every strike precise, every movement ruthless. He felt the impact of every blow, the burn of every near miss, but pain was secondary. The mission was everything. Theron watched with detached interest as his forces fell around him. When the last guard dropped, he finally moved, stepping forward with slow, deliberate intent. "You think this changes anything?" Theron's voice was almost amused. "Kill me, and the Empire remains. You are nothing but a dying ember." Wickham wiped blood from his brow, his grip tightening on his blade. "Then let's see how well your empire burns." Theron struck first, fast for a man of his stature. Wickham barely dodged the blade that cut through the air where his throat had been a second earlier. The general fought like a man who had never lost, calculated, brutal, methodical. But Wickham fought like a man with nothing left to lose. The clash was fierce, every strike carrying the weight of 1,000 lost lives. Theron's skill was undeniable, but Wickham was relentless, wearing him down, cutting past his defenses, forcing him onto the defensive. A final opening. Wickham drove his blade into Theron's chest, twisting it deep. The general staggered, eyes wide with disbelief. Blood spilled from his lips as he tried to speak, but no words came. Wickham stepped back, letting the body drop. Silence filled the bridge. Then the alarms blared again, but this time it was not the sound of Imperial control. It was collapse. Harlow's forces had breached the fleet's outer defenses. Chaos rippled through the ranks. Without Theron's leadership, the command structure fractured, officers scrambling, soldiers faltering. Wickham activated his calm, "It's done." Harlow's voice crackled through. "Then get the hell out of there." The escape was a blur of fire and motion. They raced through the warship's crumbling corridors, every step a battle against time. Explosions rocked the hull. The Empire was in freefall. They reached the hangar. A stolen fighter waited. Wickham turned back one last time, watching as the once mighty flagship burned from the inside. Then he boarded, and they tore through the battlefield, vanishing into the void. The war wasn't over, but the first stone had been cast, and the Empire would never forget the name Wickham again.